when people tell me, oh, your horses are so realistic, you know, part of me is going, oh, whatever. The other part of me is saying, thank you, because they realize, or they told me that I got the idea of a horse. And that's what the sculpture is about. It's about my idea of a horse, not necessarily being faithful to where every little tendon or bone mass is. So, anyway, when you are abstracting or stylizing something, it's important to have an element of truth there. That's what makes the difference between something that looks like a beginner made it and a professional made it. And sometimes a 7-year-old kid can get it better than we can. It's amazing to me how some of these kids can produce the most amazing stylizations of things. Picasso said it takes a long time to become young. And I think there's a lot of truth there, is that freedom of looking at something in a very simple way, we lose that at some point and have to get it back through effort and practice. There's something wrong with that. Anyway, I just keep on going up here, checking constantly to make sure that I'm not out of balance. So far, so good. And the farther I go, the less I have to adjust it, because it pretty much, as you get enough clay on here, will stay put. That doesn't mean you can't still move it, but as I pointed out earlier, you don't want to do any more moving around at this stage than you have to. This is a very weak shape. I'm not saying
this particular one.
This stage.
The stage.
This
okay.
stage is a very weak shape. I always breathe a sigh of relief when I've got a cylinder closed.
Because you're worried that belly's going to sag?
Well, I don't worry about myself. I mean, I know that this is under control. But for somebody starting out, I'm nervous about their piece, because what happens if you are, if you ever taught kids or beginners to coil build, who can predict for me what the worst thing they do is? As they build, they get a little farther out, a little farther out, a little farther out. So you end up with these huge bellies out here that you know ain't going to make it, because the clay just can't sustain itself with that shape. So the strongest shape in clay is the please do not be insulted if I throw out information that you say, of course we know that. But I'm going to say it anyway. Just, there might be somebody here who doesn't. When you make a coil pile and you close it, if you close it with a coil, it's going to try to open back up again. You can almost guarantee it's going to crack. So you notice when I started my coil horse here, I started with a slab. I'm going to finish with a slab. And it never cracks here. And it never cracks where I cut it apart. It has a whole different places it's coming back. I used to have, I very seldom have cracking with this.
And does your tail, it's much smaller than your head, but is it typically balanced or just partially balanced?
The tail is much heavier than the head.
Oh, really? Because it's not hollow?
It's not hollow. The tail's not hollow.
Oh, interesting.
So, but every tail is different. That particular pose uses a straight up head and that kind of straight up tail. I call that the Art Deco horse. But most of my horses are more like this one down here, even though this is a lying down pose, which didn't get made this way. That one I made solid because I could. Gravity was not fighting with me in that case. Imagine trying to do this with a solid body. Even with the armatures, I would be fighting because of the weight of this. So it makes sense to do this out of coils because it takes out a lot of the weight. I want the head to kind of turn this way, so I'm going to start adding. And if I don't get it quite right, sometimes I feel kind of dyslexic when I'm trying to make these turns, and I'll end up just coiling up and then cutting it off when you need to and putting it back on. Clay is amazing stuff. I mean, what it will allow you to do. But what you will love about this particular clay, if you should choose to play with it, is the fact that it's so strong to build with. It will just let you do things that other clays won't. And of course, a part of all this too is proportion. How far up do you go with the neck? And of course that varies with whatever animal you're doing. Also varies with the effect you want.
You're just using a regular needle tool there, right?
Yeah. I've broken several of these when it's been a little too, when I've gotten a little too carried away with it being stiffer, but it's, I don't know, it feels almost like a pencil to me.
Do you know where those rods are right now?
Yeah, they're in there.
They're in
I mean,
there.
but do you really like have a pretty good idea where they are inside that leg? Or
Fair. My hope is that they're in the middle, but they're probably not. I know one in particular, I think it's this one over here, has gravitated to the outside, but I don't care.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. I can fix it afterwards. What I care is that it's holding up the clay. So if you have a rod come through, and as I'm trimming here, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if I expose one. Not a problem. I mean, you just stick a wad of clay in the part when you pull the rod out.
How long do you have to let these dry before you even bisque them?
Not as long as you think.
A year.
No. No, surprisingly, usually, if it isn't raining cats and dogs and there's so much moisture in the air that it's absolutely impossible. Once I've hollowed it out well, in a week.
Wow. Can I ask you a question real quick? Why are you using a serrated rib?
Okay, thank you for asking that question. I am using this because see all these lumps and bumps on here? If I use my paddle, which I haven't used today, that's amazing, you know, that hasn't happened. I'm going to get an impression of the places where I hit with the paddle, which I'll want sometimes. If I use my hands to try and rub, my fingers are rounded, and so they are going to give a round. This serrated rib takes away all my lumps and bumps, because now I can go back.
I see.
And because I'm aiming for those fluid transitions of shapes and lines, this serrated rib is really great for getting me there. It also lets me know where I am as far as my shape is concerned.
Okay.
So, and actually this is something I picked up with Peter King. He does a lot of working with a serrated rib, and I just had never thought about it for getting a nice smooth line or smooth surface on my clay. Mm-hmm. And I was at his workshop, and I got on the phone to Mid-South Ceramics and said, can you guess? 75 of those.